You look like you haven't been warm in a while. Let me get you something that fixes that. She said it without thinking. The way people say things when they're too tired to perform politeness, and what comes out instead is just the truth. She was already reaching for the good pot, the dark roast she saved for the end of the morning rush when the cafe quieted and the air outside had that particular gray bite of November. The man at the counter hadn't said anything yet. He'd simply walked in, sat down on the stool at the far end, and stared at the countertop like a person carrying something very heavy and uncertain where to set it down. He looked up when she spoke. Something shifted in his face, not a smile, not quite, but a small, involuntary softening, the kind that happens before a person can stop it. Novalee Hatch was 30 years old. She had worked the morning shift at Birch & Company. Coffee on Delmore Avenue for 2 years. Ever since the decision, the hard one, the one she never regretted but sometimes sat with quietly in the late evenings after her daughter was asleep. She was a mother first, a waitress second, and somewhere further down the list, a woman who had once had different plans. She carried all of this with a lightness that wasn't pretend, it was practiced, earned, real. She set the coffee down in front of him. Dark, no frills, steam rising in a slow curl. He wrapped both hands around the mug. Outside, the November wind pressed against the glass. Inside, the cafe held its small, ordinary warmth. "Thank you," he said. His voice was low, a little unused, like a door that didn't open often. "That one's on me," she said, and moved back down the counter. His name was Stellan Voss. She didn't know this yet. She knew only that he came back the next morning, and the one after that, and by the fourth day she had his order ready before he sat down. Dark roast, no sugar, the stool at the far end. He was 33, and he had the particular quality of someone who had spent so long being important in rooms that he had forgotten how to simply be present in one. He answered emails while he drank. He took calls in a low, clipped voice. He tipped well and said little. But every morning, without fail, he came. It was Novalee's coworker Darby who said it first. "He comes for the coffee." "Everyone comes for the coffee," Novalee said. "He comes for your coffee," Darby said with a look. Novalee didn't answer. She thought about it on the bus home, her daughter Fern asleep against her shoulder, small and warm and smelling of the daycare's particular brand of Kraft glue and graham crackers. 4 years old, Fern was, and entirely convinced that the world was a reasonable and welcoming place. Novalee worked hard every day to make sure she stayed that way. The morning everything shifted was an ordinary Tuesday. Fern had a half day and Novalee had brought her to the cafe during the quiet stretch, something she did occasionally when the sitter cancelled and her manager, the understanding Mrs. Calloway, looked the other way. Fern sat at the end of the counter with a hot chocolate and a serious expression, narrating something to a small plastic horse she'd brought in her coat pocket. Stellan arrived at his usual time. He saw the child before he saw Novalee. He stopped, just slightly, in the way people stop when they encounter something that doesn't fit the pattern they expected. Fern looked up from her horse. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said, with the careful tone of a man who didn't spend much time around small people. "This is Bramble," she said, holding up the horse. "He's having a hard day." Stellan sat down slowly on his usual stool. He looked at the horse. "What kind of hard day?" Fern considered this with great seriousness. "He lost his friend. But I told him friends come back." Something moved across Stellan's face. There and gone like a shadow crossing water. He was quiet for a moment. "That's good advice," he said. Novalee set his coffee down and watched her daughter beam at him with the full, uncomplicated warmth of a child who had just decided someone was worth knowing. She felt something settle in her chest, something she hadn't expected. 3 weeks later, he came in early, before the rush, and sat in the corner booth instead of his usual stool. When Novalee brought his coffee, he said, "Can you sit down for a minute?" She did, because something in his voice asked for it plainly. "I want to tell you something," he said. He turned the mug once in his hands. I went to Caldwell University. Class of, he named a year. Her year. She looked at him. I don't think we ever spoke, he said. But I remembered you. You used to study in the East Library by the window. You always had 2 coffees, one for you and one for whoever sat down next to you. He paused. I sat next to you once. I didn't say anything. I was different then. More closed. He stopped. You gave me the coffee. You didn't know me. You just gave it to me. Novalee stared at him. The memory was there, somewhere. Not him specifically, but the habit. Yes, she had done that. She had always kept an extra cup. I never forgot it, he said simply. I don't think I understood until much later what it meant. That someone just decided you were worth a cup of coffee before you'd done anything to deserve it. The cafe was quiet around them. The morning light was doing something lovely through the windows. Stellan Voss, he said. I should have introduced myself a long time ago. Novalee Hatch, she said. I should have charged you for that first coffee. He laughed. The real kind, unguarded, the kind she hadn't heard from him before. It changed his whole face. Nothing happened quickly after that. That is the truth of real things. They grow slowly or they don't grow at all. But he kept coming. He started talking. She started listening. He met Fern properly, and Fern decided he was acceptable after he correctly identified that Bramble the horse was a thoroughbred and not a pony. He began to seem less like a man carrying something and more like a man setting it down, piece by piece, in a warm room. One evening he asked if he could bring Fern a book he'd seen in a shop window, a horse encyclopedia, the big illustrated kind. Novalee said yes. Fern received it with the reverence of someone handed a sacred text. She's remarkable, Stellan said, watching Fern flip pages with focused intensity. She is, Novalee said. She assumes the best of everyone until they show her otherwise. She paused. I'm trying to stay worthy of that. He looked at her. You've been doing that since a library window in October, 11 years ago. She looked down at her coffee. Outside, November had turned to December, and the street held that particular blue-gray of early winter evenings. Inside, the small apartment was warm and lit and smelled of Fern's hot chocolate and old books. The moral is carried in a single quiet moment. A college girl who kept an extra cup of coffee for whoever sat beside her, and a closed-off man who never forgot it. Kindness given without expectation plants itself in people and wait. It waited 11 years in Stellan Voss. It waited until a November morning and a woman who said you look like you haven't been warm in a while. And then it came home. Small warmth. Given freely. It always finds its way back. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, subscribe, and comment. Let's spread more stories of kindness and hope together.